What happens when the world tries to crush your child? I stayed silent for too long, until I realized silence was killing her. They thought they could break my daughter's spirit, but I made sure they never forgot my name. They say a father's love is protective, unshakable, and sometimes terrifying when tested. My name is Daniel Harris, and I am the father of a 17-year-old girl named Emily. Emily was the kind of daughter any parent would be proud of. Smart, disciplined, compassionate. She had earned a reputation at her school as the kid who always helped others. She was preparing for her final year of high school, and with her grades, she had her eyes set on a scholarship that could change her future. But where there is light, there are always shadows. For Emily, those shadows came in the form of a group of students who couldn't stand her success. They weren't just jealous. They were determined to see her fail. At first, it was subtle, whispers in the hallways, eye rolls, small pranks. Emily would come home, brush it off, and tell me it was nothing. But a father always knows. I could see the way she lingered in her room longer, the way her smile didn't reach her eyes anymore. Then it escalated. One day, Emily came home in tears. I will never forget her trembling voice as she said, "Dad, they call me a fraud. They said I cheated on my exams." I froze. My daughter? Cheating? Impossible. She showed me her phone. Anonymous messages filled with venom, accusing her of faking grades, spreading lies that she had bribed teachers. The worst part? Some teachers were beginning to believe it. As her father, I wanted to storm into that school, drag every one of those kids out, and make them confess. But Emily, she begged me not to. "Dad, please," she whispered, clutching my arm. "If you fight back, they'll only push harder. I can handle this." I nodded, swallowing my rage. That night, lying awake, I told myself silence was protection, that if I stayed calm, things would settle. But silence, I would soon learn, is not always strength. Sometimes silence becomes a wound, one that cuts deeper every day. Because what came next wasn't just bullying. It was war. Silence had lasted only a few days before it started to crack. I watched Emily carry herself to school like a soldier with invisible wounds, shoulders stiff, eyes scanning for ambushes. Every parent meeting I attended felt like walking into a room where people already had their verdict. By the end of the first week, the rumor had teeth. A screenshot, some student's taunting collage, circulated in a private group on a messaging app. Faces I recognized from PTA events laughed in frozen thumbnails. The caption called Emily a pay-to-win student and claimed screenshots of a teacher's chat proved bribery. I asked Emily where the screenshots came from. She said she didn't know. She said the school would see the truth. She said to trust the process. Trust the process. The phrase tasted like poison. I am not a man who likes courtrooms, but I know how bureaucracy works. Slow, defensive, and allergic to scandal. If teachers and administrators sense a fight, they would fold into damage control. I tried to act rational. Scheduled a meeting with the school counselor, then the principal. I went armed with transcript printouts, test papers, examples of Emily's work. I showed them Emily's meticulous notes, the time-stamped computer files that proved long nights of studying, not cheating. The principal smiled with that detached civility people use when they don't want to be dragged into a mess. "We take allegations seriously, Mr. Harris," she said. "We'll investigate." Her eyes, though, flicked to the corner where the other parents sat quietly. I could read the code. Keep things contained. Don't belittle the school's reputation. Don't make waves. Meanwhile, the messages evolved. Someone had the cruelty to edit a video of Emily answering a practice exam in class, cut the parts where she appeared confused, splice the rest to make it look like she got answers handed to her. It was crude, but for the viewers who wanted a story, it worked. Comments stacked on top of one another, accusations, sick jokes, petitions. A local online forum, the one everyone in our town scanned for gossip, ran with the story. It was no longer a schoolyard whisper. It had become a public prosecution. Emily held up. For a while, I thought she might actually come through this without breaking. She kept attending classes, kept her grades steady. She smiled for family dinners, kept her head down when I walked her to the bus stop. But that's the thing about a slow-burning wound. It doesn't announce itself loudly. It drains you. One night, she lay awake until 2 in the morning with a textbook across her lap and tears on the pillow. She told me she was scared not because she thought she had done something wrong, but because people had decided she was unworthy. And sometimes, she said, people don't stop at deciding. When a scholarship committee contacted the school to flag inconsistencies in Emily's application, my stomach dropped through the floor. Emily's scholarship was more than a letter with money. It was a fragile staircase out of our narrow possibilities. Without it, college would be a dream postponed by at least 5 years, maybe forever. I remember the hollow, mechanical conversation with the committee. We're reviewing the same language the principal used. Paperwork, meetings, reviews, the machinery of caution grinding everything to a halt. At that point, the father inside me stopped pretending calm was a strategy. I began to look, not in the dramatic way you see on the shows. No burst through the door theatrics, no yelling across classrooms. My work schedule allowed me to sit up late and trace the trail the attackers had left. I asked Emily to let me see every message, every screenshot. Reluctant at first, she handed me her phone with shaking hands. There, buried under a stack of memes and group chats, was the map. The first thing I noticed was how neat the path was. These weren't random kids lashing out. There was coordination, specific times, coordinated posts, a single anonymous account that posted the initial video. The messages were tagged and forwarded rapidly, like a relay race. Someone with influence was running the baton. A name appeared often in the threads: Chloe Mercer. She'd been at our school a year ahead, popular, a debate team star, the sort of kid whose parents knew all the right people. Her circle liked to wear the same designer logo scarves at PDA bake sales. Chloe's comments were sharp and cutting. Her followers repeated what she said until it began to look like fact. I checked Chloe's public profiles and found pictures from last month. Laughing at parties, posing with teachers and stage, casual snaps. Whether or not she had direct access to exam materials was unclear, but influence is a currency just as damaging as proof. I called a former colleague, a friend who worked in IT, and owed me a favor. I asked him, hypothetically, how one might find the origin of a message in a closed group. He told me about metadata, timestamps, forwarded message chains, server logs. It was technical, dry, and precise, the kind of language that makes the real world feel reparable. For the first time since Emily's name started being dragged to the mud, I felt an outline of something like hope. But I also learned something darker. The more you show interest, the more you risk giving your opponent a target. A well-meaning email to the principal could be recast as pressuring the school. A public demand for investigation could be spun into raising a fuss. Our adversaries were counting on this. They wanted fear. They wanted quiet submission. And above all, they wanted us to fracture into a defensive mess so they could keep the upper hand. So I stopped talking to people who didn't need to know. I started keeping records. I photographed every hateful post and screenshot, saved copies of every forwarded message, and backed them up in 2 places. I printed timestamps, preserved cache details, and annotated notes every evening like a man preparing a case file for an invisible court. And I did one more thing that would haunt me in ways I did not expect. I reached out to Chloe's mother, not to accuse, but to listen. I thought perhaps a direct human conversation could crack the shell of cruelty. The call was polite and superficial, the kind of courteous distance wealthy people keep when unpleasant things happen in their orbit. Chloe's mother said she was sure her daughter would never, ever be involved in anything like this. She thanked me for taking the time and promised she would look into it. There was no apology, no confession, no mercy, only the soft, impenetrable shield of someone who believed their world was safe. That call, however, gave me something I did not expect. Motive. People with things to lose protect themselves and their reputations with surprising ferocity. If Chloe wanted to keep her image unblemished, she had reason and motive to silence or destroy anyone who threatened it. Motive is not proof, but it is a spark you can follow. At home, Emily began to retreat into the small rituals that once gave her comfort. She reheated tea 3 times before it tasted right. She rewrote lines of essays until the letters blurred, to prove to herself that she still knew how to think. Once, when I came into her room, I found a paper with a list of colleges she hoped to attend. The scholarship amount circled and penciled like a lifeline. I folded it into my pocket without saying a word. That night, I dreamed that the whole town had become a room of mirrors, every surface reflecting a version of Emily that she had never authorized. I woke with single clear thought. Silence had protected nothing. It had allowed them to build a story without contradiction, one that could stand in public because no one had offered a better version. I had to become the better version. So I began to plan. Not revenge yet, not in the way popular stories celebrate sudden vengeance, but a methodical reclaiming of truth. I would follow the trail, gather facts, and prepare for the moment when what we had, the quiet, stubborn truth, could no longer be ignored. I would learn the rules of their game, and then I would use them against them. Emily slept that night with the last of her textbook lights dimmed, and I sat at the kitchen table until the small hours, writing down everything I knew and everything I needed to find. The list grew long. The names multiplied. The evidence lines up like teeth, some sharp, some loose, but all pointing at the same source of poison. I promised myself, and more importantly, I promised Emily, that I would not let them make her into a story that ended with her being the villain. If the town had decided on a narrative, I would write another. If they remembered her as something lesser, I would make them remember my name first. I did what any reasonable man would. I turned the stove of their lies down until the heat cooled enough to examine the bottom of the pan. I wasn't theatrical. I didn't want headlines that would only feed the rumor mill. I wanted facts, clean, indisputable facts, and a way to show them so the town could no longer choose fiction over evidence. My friend from IT, Mark, came over that Saturday. He sat at my kitchen table with the calm, methodical patience of someone who speaks in code and sees the world in logs and timestamps. I poured coffee and explained everything. He listened, thumb steepled, then asked two simple questions that shifted the hunt into a new gear. Who posted the original video? Where did it first appear? We traced the anonymous account as far as we could. Closed groups and private threads are designed to hide fingerprints, but they're not perfect. People make mistakes. Links get forwarded. Screenshots leak. It didn't take long before Mark found a breadcrumb, a forwarded chain that led to an account registered on a throwaway email. The kind you set up on a whim. The registrar showed a phone number partially hidden, but with a pattern that repeated. 3 messages forwarded from a teen's account to an older number, and that older number had the same last 3 digits as Chloe Mercer's father's business line. It was circumstantial, thin, but it was a thread. Circumstantial threads become rope when you keep pulling. I didn't want to confront Chloe directly yet. That would only allow her to retreat behind polished denials. Instead, we began following collateral evidence. Chloe's inner circle had a rhythm online. The way they liked posts, the phrasing they used, shared memes with identical timestamps. Mark taught me how to read those rhythms, an almost musical pattern of coordination. From the times of posts, we mapped when each account was active and compared it to local events. A pattern emerged. Most of the coordinators were at a charity gala the night the first messages went out. Photograph from the gala had been tagged publicly. We cross-checked faces and handles. One of the tag photos had been cropped and re-uploaded in a personal account the next morning, and that personal account was linked to a user who had forwarded the edited video. I'm not going to pretend it was all neat and clean. There were dead ends and stones that led nowhere. There were moments when a lead dissolved into possibilities rather than proof. I slept less. I drank too much coffee. I become, for a while, a detective not by trade but by necessity. Every night I'd lay out printouts on the dining table like an ancient cartographer mapping a coastline. Sticky notes, arrows, highlighted lines. Emily would sometimes come down and sit with me, running her fingers along the margin of a printout as if the paper could comfort her the way I couldn't. Meanwhile, the school moved like molasses. They held meetings and suggested mediation, as if those insults could be threaded backward through a handshake. The scholarship committee postponed its decision, citing pending inquiries. Those words felt like a lock snapping shut on a door we'd worked so hard to open. If the school would not act, then the community would have to be shown the evidence in a way that could not be deflected as family fighting. I needed witnesses and a venue where facts could be displayed plainly. I also needed to protect Emily from the retaliatory tides that often follow pushing back. Public humiliation begets public pity, and pity is a double-edged sword in small towns. So I moved cautiously, layering one action on another. First, I gathered allies. Not many, but enough. A teacher who had once tutored Emily and could vouch for her work ethic. An older student from the debate team who had quietly stood up to Chloe in the past, marked with his logs. And a journalist friend who freelanced for the regional paper and had a streak against mob-driven narratives. I told them only what they needed to know. You learn quickly who will remain calm under pressure and who will run to the nearest camera with a headline in mind. The people I chose were careful. We planted small, smart seeds. The teacher took Emily's old homework into the faculty meeting without fanfare, showing a progression of reasoning that matched the answers Emily had been accused of stealing. The debate student recorded a testimony about Chloe's tendency to weaponize gossip for advantage. Mark produced a timeline of the message forwards with metadata that showed a concentrated activity spike the night of the gala. The journalist listened and asked clinical questions, then said he might run an explainer article, one that laid out facts without sensationalism. I remember the day the first domino fell. A parent, not one of ours, handed me a printout in the supermarket aisle. She had been at the gala and didn't like what she saw in the way the photographs had been cropped and shared after the night. Small apologies started to appear in private texts from parents who had initially been complicit by silence. It was not widespread, but it was enough to break the idea that everyone supported the rumor. Quiet admissions are a kind of confession in themselves. They acknowledge that what was said publicly may have been wrong in private. With that shift, the scholarship committee could no longer pretend they had no pressure. They scheduled a review meeting and requested everything: our documentation, the school's internal communication logs, and the original posts. The principal, who had been so careful to avoid waves, now had to show she had done her due diligence. But I didn't trust the insular processes. Institutions protect themselves, often at the expense of the marginalized. I wanted my daughter's vindication to be seen by the town in a way that left little room for spin. So we used the local paper. The journalist friend wrote a piece that avoided melodrama and stuck to verifiable events. The edited video's origins, the timeline of forwarded messages, the gala photos linked to the accounts, and testimony from a trusted teacher about Emily's authentic work. The article ran on a damp Monday morning, and the town read it like a slow but steady rain that eroded a bluff. People talked. Some were angry that they believed lies. Some were quietly horrified at how easily a reputation could be dismantled. Some refused to budge. Chloe's defenders lashed out online, but their voices sounded tinny against documented timelines and corroborated testimony. Momentum shifted in tiny increments. A parent who'd share a post privately apologized publicly. A student who had commented with venom deactivated his account. The scholarship committee wrote to say they would reconvene with the new evidence. Through it all, Emily remained fragile. Victory can be as destabilizing as defeat when it is not yet complete. We celebrated small wins, a return compliment, a teacher's private message, a counselor's corrected memo, but I kept my joy measured because I knew how fast a tide can reverse. Then something unexpected happened. Chloe made a mistake. She assumed a private message to a confidant could be off the record. It contained the kind of arrogance that corrodes, laughter about teaching someone her place, and a throwaway mention of making sure she never gets that scholarship. The confidant, who had been uneasy all along, forwarded the message to Mark with an apology. Mark, careful and methodical, verified the screenshot metadata and matched it to Chloe's account activity. We were no longer dealing with conjecture. We had a direct line from the anticipation of harm to its execution. The principal could no longer pretend ignorance, and the scholarship committee had a clear record. The board called an emergency hearing. Even then, I did not want exile or ruin for Chloe. I didn't want to crown myself judge and executioner. What I wanted was accountability, a public acknowledgement of wrongdoing, a retraction, and a restoration of Emily's name. If Chloe could apologize in front of the people she'd tried to mislead, that would teach everyone something more important than vengeance. That power without conscience inevitably fractures anyone who trusts in it. The hearing was a sterile thing, held in the school auditorium. Parents filled the seats like a town-turned jury. I sat beside Emily, feeling her heartbeat like a small animal against my ribs. The principal read out findings. The video had been edited. The origin traced the forwarded messages connected to Chloe's network, and the scholarship committee announced they would restore Emily's application to active consideration. There was a hush, as if everyone understood that a narrative had been replaced with something more factual and therefore less tidy. Chloe took the stage, cheeks flushed, eyes darting for sympathy, and finding mostly disappointment. Her apology came out thin, practiced. She said she had shared things without realizing the impact and that she regretted the role she played. It was not everything I wanted. It would never undo the nights of panic, the small humiliations, the way my daughter had considered the shape of her future in a world that might deny her, but it was a public correction. The town had heard her say it. When we walked out of the auditorium, people I had not expected to speak to us did. Some patted my shoulder. One man who had shared the edited video before the articles begged for forgiveness quietly and quickly, as one does when confronted with how their complacency had hurt a child. Emily's cheeks were wet, but this time with something that looked like relief. That night at home, she allowed herself a small, ragged smile. "You remember to write your name everywhere," she said, referring to the way I had started signing my emails and documents with more formality, as if my name stamped on evidence could hold it together. I grinned back, thinking of how the town would now have to say the names attached to deeds. Chloe, the principal, the committee members, and mine, Daniel Harris. But this was not the end. The scholarship reinstatement was a victory. But the stain of public humiliation does not vanish with one official letter. There would be whispers yet. There would be those who claimed the whole thing was orchestrated. The wound had been cauterized in part, but the scar would remain. And so I realized, repair is not a single moment. It is a long, steady work. We had won a legal and social foothold. But now I had to make sure Emily could climb the next steps without fear that the ground would give way again. We would rebuild her future brick by brick. I had given the town a reason to remember my name. Now I would give my daughter back the quiet certainty of being herself. As I went to bed that night, I made another list. This one wasn't about culprits or timelines. It was about rebuilding. Tutors, college applications reviewed, community outreach to teach students about the power of online cruelty, and a careful, patient repair of reputation. Revenge, I had learned, was not always fireworks and spectacle. Sometimes it was a slow, steady work of undoing damage with facts, allies, and unrelenting insistence that truth deserved a place at the table. Emily slept with the bedroom light half on. I sat at my desk and wrote an email to the scholarship committee, this time including additional samples of Emily's work and a personal note about her resilience. I signed it, beneath my name, in the way I had learned to sign it lately, not to demand credit, but to stake a claim. Daniel Harris was standing with his daughter. If anyone tried to erase her again, they would have to remember who had stood up with her first. Justice is strange. When it comes, it doesn't roar like thunder. It arrives quietly, in a letter and an apology, in the shift of a crowd's eyes. But quiet victories leave behind embers, and embers have a way of burning long after the flames are gone. For a while, it felt like life was returning to normal. Emily's scholarship application was reinstated. Her name cleared in official records, and the whispers began to fade. She even started smiling again, real smiles, the kind that reach your eyes. But beneath that calm, I sensed something unsettled. Chloe and her circle didn't vanish. They didn't openly attack anymore, but silence doesn't mean surrender. I could see it in their eyes at school events, in the way conversations paused when Emily walked by. Revenge leaves scars not just on the victim, but on the guilty too. And people with scars often lash out in uglier ways. One evening, Emily came into the kitchen holding her phone, her hand shaking. "Dad, look." On the screen was a new anonymous account. This time careful, clean, harder to trace. It hadn't accused her directly, but it posted vague truth bombs, claiming some kids get ahead because of lies and pity. It was Chloe's voice without Chloe's name. I clenched my jaw. The war wasn't over. That night, I sat in my study staring at the wall, asking myself the hardest question. How far should father go? Clearing Emily's name was one thing, but could I keep fighting shadows forever? Every rumor, every hidden jab? Or did I need to strike deeper in a way that made sure this would never happen again? The answer came from Emily herself. We were sitting on the porch, the autumn air sharp with the smell of fallen leaves. She was quiet for a long time, then finally whispered, "Dad, I don't just want them to stop. I want people to know how easy it is for lies to destroy someone. I don't want this to happen to anyone else." Her words hit me harder than anything else had. Emily wasn't asking for revenge anymore. She was asking for change. And so, our fight entered a new phase. I reached out to the journalist again. This time, we didn't just tell Emily's story. We built something larger. A piece about how small-town gossip, digital cruelty, and unchecked privilege can ruin a young person's future. It wasn't just about Chloe anymore. It was about the culture that allowed her to thrive. The article spread beyond our town. A regional news outlet picked it up. Then a national blog ran with it. Suddenly, people who had never heard of Emily were talking about the dangers of digital bullying, about accountability in schools, about scholarships and fairness. My daughter's pain had become part of a conversation bigger than us, and Chloe's family hated it. I got a call one night from Chloe's father. His voice was sharp, threatening. "You've made your point, Harris. Drop it, or you'll regret dragging my daughter's name through the mud." I laughed bitterly. Through the mud? She dove in herself. All I did was hold up a mirror, and I hung up, but that call told me something important. The Mercers were scared. Their name, once untouchable in town, was now being whispered for all the wrong reasons. Business clients were asking questions. Invitations to galas grew fewer. The social crown Chloe wore so proudly was cracking. Yet victory wasn't sweet. Watching Emily heal mattered more to me than seeing Chloe crumble. Some nights, Emily would still cry in her room. Some mornings, she'd still hesitate before walking out the door. Clearing her name didn't erase the months of torment she'd lived through. I realized revenge wasn't enough. Punishing Chloe didn't rebuild Emily's spirit. That was something only love, time, and patience could do. So I became more than just a protector. I became her partner in rebuilding. We worked on her college essays together, crafted applications that told her story of resilience, and spent evenings planning for her future. For every scar Chloe left, we built something stronger over it. But fate wasn't done testing us. Because just when we thought the battle was finally over, something happened that shook everything again. Something that proved the Mercers weren't finished, and that my fight as a father had only just begun. It was late November when the storm returned. Emily had finally regained a sense of peace, her scholarship prospects looking strong, her laughter reappearing at the dinner table. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to believe we'd outrun the worst of it. But cruelty has a way of clawing back when it feels cornered. One Thursday morning, I woke to find my email inbox flooded. Anonymous messages again. Accusations, screenshots, and one particularly vile PDF, a forged plagiarism report, supposedly proving Emily's essays weren't her own. This wasn't the work of careless teenagers anymore. This was calculated, professional, and deliberate. My stomach sank. Chloe's family had escalated. This wasn't just teenage spite. This was adults using money, influence, and connections to erase my daughter once and for all. Emily found me staring at the screen, fists trembling. "Dad," she whispered, "they won't stop, will they?" I pulled her into my arms. For the first time, I let her feel the full weight of my resolve. "No, sweetheart," I said, "they won't stop, not until I make sure they can't." That night, I made a choice. This wasn't going to be a quiet defense anymore. It was time for me to step fully into the fire. I started gathering everything we had: the falsified video, the social media patterns, the confession screenshot, and now the forged plagiarism report. Every file, every timestamp, every testimony went into a single massive dossier. I hired a lawyer, not just any lawyer, but one who specialized in defamation and cyber harassment cases. When I showed her the evidence, she leaned back and let out a low whistle. "Mr. Harris," she said, "you're not just looking at a school scandal anymore. This is systemic harassment. This is a lawsuit." And that's what we did. We filed a case not just against Chloe, but against her parents for aiding, abetting, and funding the attacks, for defamation, for intentional infliction of emotional distress, for trying to destroy a minor's future with lies. The town exploded when the news broke. Some called me brave. Others called me insane. No one had ever dared to drag the Mercer family into court. But I didn't care. This wasn't about the town anymore. This was about Emily, about every tear she cried, every night she questioned her worth, every moment she thought her dreams were slipping away. The trial was brutal. Chloe's father hired high-profile attorneys who tried to paint Emily as overly sensitive, me as an overprotective father looking for attention. But the evidence spoke louder than their theatrics. Every forged file, every anonymous message, every digital fingerprint, it all tied back to Chloe's circle. And when the judge saw the confession screenshot, verified and time-stamped, their defense cracked wide open. I'll never forget the day of the verdict. The courtroom was packed, air-heavy with anticipation. The judge's voice was steady as he read. Liable for defamation. Liable for harassment. Damages awarded to the Harris family. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Chloe's mother buried her face in her hands. Chloe sat stone-faced, finally stripped of the smug power she once wore like armor. Emily squeezed my hand so tightly I thought my bones would break. Her eyes shimmered with tears, but this time they weren't tears of fear or pain. They were tears of release. For the first time in nearly a year, my daughter was free. After the case, everything changed. The scholarship committee not only confirmed Emily's award, but also publicly praised her resilience. Colleges reached out directly, offering her spots in programs she'd only dreamed of. She wasn't just seen as a victim anymore. She was seen as a fighter, a survivor, someone who refused to be broken. As for me, I became something I never expected, a symbol. Parents began reaching out, thanking me for standing up, for showing that silence doesn't protect. It only prolongs the wound. I started speaking at local schools about digital cruelty, about the responsibility of parents, about the price of unchecked privilege. And the Mercers? Their empire of influence crumbled slowly, painfully. Business contracts dried up. Invitations vanished. Their name, once spoken with reverence, became a cautionary tale whispered with disdain. They had tried to break my daughter. They had tried to erase her future. But instead they destroyed their own. One evening, as Emily and I walked past the school, I saw something spray-painted faintly on the brick wall, already half scrubbed away. Truth always wins. Emily smiled a small, quiet smile and slipped her hand into mine. In that moment, I realized something. This wasn't just about revenge. It wasn't even just about justice. It was about making sure the world remembered that when you come after a child's future, you awaken something far more dangerous than ambition. You awaken a father, and a father never forgets. So when people ask me what happened back then, why the Mercers fell, why Emily's name rose higher than ever, I tell them the truth in a single line. They tried to break my daughter, but I made sure they never forgot my name.